So just to let you all know, it will be recorded so we can share it later on if anybody wants to view this presentation later. And I'm facilitating this myself. I don't have a helper today, so I didn't feel like I needed it since it's just the three of us. So with that said, I'm not going to pay a lot of attention to the chat. So if you got a little bit of chat here and there between people or shared with whoever, that's fine. But I'm mostly going to be paying attention to the Q&A. So if you guys have questions that come up through the course of our dialogue, feel free to ask them. And if I see it and I feel like it's pertinent for the moment, I'll grab it. Otherwise, I'm going to hold those until we wrap up and handle questions toward the end. Looks like Chief Williams is here. Chief Williams, welcome. Chief Williams, there you are.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm trying to get on a computer. I'm on my phone right now, having a few technical issues.
Okay. Well, I'm just going over housekeeping items right now. So whatever works for you. If you want to try to get on your computer, that's fine.
I'm working on it. We're scheduled to start at what time?
6 o'clock. Yeah. So I'm just,
okay.
I've started, I let people know we're recording and I'm just taking care of a few housekeeping items. The third housekeeping item I have for you all is oftentimes when I do these, I will have a survey that pushes out right after this, but I'm not doing it this time. I didn't feel like it really warranted a survey post our webinar. But if you guys do have any questions or comments you want to share, feel free to reach out to me at my email if you have it. Otherwise, you can go to FireSafe Sonoma's website and shoot us an email through there. Or there's a link to our email through this registration. When you registered, there should be a link to our email if you have any questions or comments. So while Chief Williams is getting set up, I'm going to do introductions. We have Chief Ben Nicholls here from CAL FIRE. Chief Nicholls, you want to kind of introduce yourself?
Good evening. Thank you for having me, Roberta. So my name is Ben, and I am here representing CAL FIRE. I oversee the Sonoma County operations of the Sonoma Lake Napa unit. Prevention is one of my passions in life, that we can do things more proactively prior to those fire events occurring. And so the defensible space work that we're doing out there prior to fires happening and the vegetation management on the landscape is key to our success down the road. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, and welcome. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking the time out this evening out of your regular business day to join us and provide us with some good information. Chief Williams, can you take a second and introduce yourself?
Good evening. Very happy to be here this evening. My name is James Williams. I'm in the County of Sonoma Fire Marshal, and as Chief Nicholls indicated, taking care of defensible space and reducing fuel loads is an imperative in ensuring that we provide a higher degree of safety for the public and giving firefighters an opportunity to defend structures. And so I'm glad that you're able to join us tonight and hope we'll be able to impart some good information for you. Thank you.
And thank you, Chief Williams, for joining us and taking the time out of your day to help us dive into some of these regulations and try to understand them a little bit. So the kind of agenda I want to follow today is really going to be brief. I want to start out with Chief Nicholls describing for us what the state regulations are specific to defensible space. And then I'll talk to Chief Williams and have him weigh in on the local, county, when I say local, county regulations related to defensible space. And then after that, I want to kind of bring up a couple of issues that I've been hearing from folks that have concerns and they want to see if there are solutions. And then I also want to ping you guys to see if you see any new regulations on the horizon that we should be aware of. And yeah, and overall at the end, generally I hope to address any issues that have impacts to property owners that we can help solve, or at least point them in the right direction. So with that said, I'm going to start off with you, Chief Williams. Can you kind of give us the Reader's Digest version of the codes and regulations that CAL FIRE enforces relative to defensible space, probably specifically, you know, it's California Public Resource Code 4251 to 4290 and 4291 to 4299. And then also, if you wouldn't mind, maybe talk to us a little bit about the Title 14 of the Natural Resources Code. Within that body of regulation, there's what's called the California Fire Safe Regulations. And those actually mirror the county's fire safe standards for the most part. The county's fire safe standards were mirrored off of those Title 14 regulations years ago. And I think that's still the case. So Chief Nicholls, if you can kind of give us a rundown there, that would be great.
Sure. So thank you very much. So when we're talking about defensible space around homes and things that we're doing to prepare that home for future wildfire events, 4290 Public Resources Code 4290 talks about new construction and basically the road standards and the access to get to that structure, the on-site water requirements that are in place to be there, so on and so forth. And we as an agency have given Sonoma County the authority to conduct those inspections for new inspections. So I think I'll defer that to Chief Williams. But 4291 under the Public Resources Code talks about the ongoing defensible space work that has to be done annually to ensure that that home, not only is the home protected from wildfire, but it's also protecting the wildland from a structure fire. So it breaks that continuity of fuel between the house and the vegetation so that a fire struggles to go either way. So 4291 ties into the sections that we're looking at when we do those inspections, comes back to the California Code of Regulations and Title 14, like you mentioned, Roberta. And basically, when we're doing the defensible space inspections on those annual events, we're basically looking for 14 things when we show up to your home. And so that starts at around the house, and that's our 30-foot zone. So from the edge of the house out 30 feet, in that zone, we don't want to see any dead grass. The grass has to be cut. Any dead material has to be removed. We have to separate live flammable ground covers. So depending on where in the county somebody lives, be it coyote brush out on the coast, maybe manzanita over in the Mayakama range, that we break that natural ground cover so that a fire doesn't have the ability to rapidly transmit from the surrounding vegetation into that house. And we want any dead and dying trees, basically any dead material in that 30-foot zone, we want out, and that includes wood piles. So during the winter time, we store our wood piles up against the house or close to the house because we don't want to go out in the rain or the cold to go get that firewood. But it's imperative during fire season that that firewood gets moved at least 30 feet away from the house. And then wherever that ends up, we need 10 feet of bare mineral soil around that wood pile so that a fire creeping through the grass or burning through the grass doesn't have the ability to get into that wood pile. To go with the 30 foot, still staying within that 30 foot around the house, we want to make sure that any trees, dead portions of trees, or any portions of trees that are within 10 feet of the outlet to the chimney are cut back and away from the house so that we, one, don't have a fire that starts in a tree branch hanging over the chimney and goes out, and or any dead material burning and falling into the house. The other major thing that we're looking for in that 30-foot zone, especially in the modern era, that it used to be that a lot of folks thought the flaming front was what actually destroyed most houses. But in our conflagration fire events that we're seeing, it's the ember cast long before the fire front ever actually gets to the house that's consuming those houses. And so we're looking for dead leaf material or needles in the gutters or on the roof or on the deck that act like catcher's gloves and catch those embers and start a small fire before it transmits to the house and burns the entire house down. We also want to make sure that any flammable items or vegetation underneath decks or stairways underneath the bottom of the house. It's a great storage spot. After living out on the river, you know, you got a house hanging out over a hillside, so a good place to kind of tuck things out of the way and not see them is underneath the house. Unfortunately, fire wants to go up before it does anything else. And so if we don't get those materials out from underneath the house or a deck, they too ignite long before the house does, and then actually transmits into the house and burns the house down from the inside out. So that's our 30-foot zone. We want grass no taller than 4 inches when we cut that grass. And so then we used to refer to that before droughts and water conditions became different to the lean and green zone. Green isn't as important at this point because depending on the water on site or the landscaping you have, green may not be a deal, but the lean component, getting rid of all that dead material, imperative, and those ornamental bushes or shrubs that you have, breaking up that continuity to limit that fire spread into the house. So then we go out from 30 feet to 100 feet. And the catch for the state side of the house, the Public Resources Code, is it's out to 100 feet or the property line, whichever occurs first. So a home in Rio Neto, you may only have 5 feet from the house before you're onto the neighbor's property. So underneath the Public Resources Code, there's not an obligation of that homeowner to modify the vegetation on their neighbor's property. So assuming we've got a full 100 feet from the house, at the 30-foot mark out to 100 feet, we basically are breaking the vegetation continuity out there. So out there in that neck of the woods, all the cured annual grasses, that's getting cut down to 4 inches as well. And any dead material, dead and down, we want to get rid of that so that there's not a receptive fuel source in there. And basically we're breaking that continuity. So where we can, we're creating spacing in the canopy. So we may selectively remove trees that otherwise would have had a solid canopy of leaves from the surrounding vegetation into the house. We want to break that up so that when you have individual torching, it doesn't create a running crown fire that runs into the house. We talked about the wood piles already, down to bare mineral soil around that wood pile. We recommend, but it's not a have to have in that area because it's removed from the house, but covering it with some fire resistive tarp, be it a canvas or material that's not going to readily burn. And then we also want to make sure that surface fuels that are in the ground, so either dead stumps, decaying stumps, or larger woody material is also removed so that we're not transmitting that fire front into the house. Propane tanks is another critical one that we're looking at, that we need to have no flammable material around that propane tank. So just like the wood piles, it's down to 10 foot of bare mineral soil all the way around that propane tank, because if you allow the leaf accumulation, depending on the enclosure or the setup that you have on the tank, that can allow extra fire impingement on the propane tank, which may end up resulting in a BLEVE or a boiling liquid vapor explosion, which then would cause significant damage to the house and potentially severely injure firefighters or surrounding people. Address numbers is a critical component that we look for, and it's a significant deal for a rapid response for fire. But I always tell people that it far more benefits them in a medical or law enforcement emergency, where maybe those responders don't have a large fire in front of them or a smoke column that they're able to trace back to the actual seat of the fire. So when we're looking at those addresses standards, it's 4-inch numbers with a 1-inch stroke on a contrasting color background so that it stands out to those responders coming. And it's not just one direction of travel, because depending on the road bed, if it's not a dead end road, you could have fire or emergency responders coming from different directions. So it's important that address is visible in both travels of direction out at the main road. And then finally, transmitting the fireplace embers. So if somebody's having a fireplace, and more so than anymore, those are starting to go away. But those that had a fire in the fireplace, making sure that there's a 3/8 inch to a 1/2 inch, maximum of a 1/2 inch mesh on that fire chimney cap, so that that doesn't allow embers or burning paper material from the ignition of the fireplace to transmit that into the surrounding vegetation. So that's kind of the gist of the 4291 inspections conducted underneath the CAL FIRE Defensible Space Inspection Program.
Yeah, so I wanted to mention that with those basic minimum requirements, there's language in the code that basically says that those regulations are quote, so that a wildfire burning under average weather conditions won't propagate. So that's the thing. I mean, people could do more, but that's the minimum for a regular, everyday, run-of-the-mill garden variety fire, which is a little different than some of the fires we've seen here in recent history. So that's something I do want people to be aware of. Chief Nicholls, can you, well, the one thing I do want to mention too is it feels like CAL FIRE's mission is evolving. I remember years ago, you know, when I was still a boot firefighter, looking at the mission of CAL FIRE and noticing that it was quote unquote, you know, basically built for resource conservation, meaning I think the goal at the time was to keep a fire in a building from consuming the forest, the natural resource. Now your mission's kind of morphed now, hasn't it? Aren't you guys leaning more towards life and property conservation as well? Not that, you know, the resource isn't like a value, but are you leaning more towards, you know, people and people structures for protecting them?
So for us, just like the rest of the fire service, our 3 priorities when we have any emergency incident is life, property, and the environment.
Mm-hmm.
So historically, at the origins of forestry, be it on the state level or the federal level, yeah, it was protecting those natural resources that were being harvested to support our country. Here in California, obviously, and across the country, but specifically here in California, we're in a Mediterranean environment. So fire on the landscape is a natural thing, and it's what our ecosystems have come to expect and thrive on. The difference in today versus before modern human beings occupied the landscape is that 99% of our fires here in Sonoma County are human caused.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those are malicious, and some of those are people doing the right thing at the wrong time. In defensible space, I just jumped off a call with Supervisor Rabbit talking about the fact that here in the last couple of weeks, we've had folks that are doing the right thing at the wrong time, creating their defensible space, and unfortunately not using lawnmowers and vegetation modification devices appropriately, and so they've started fires. And luckily, there haven't been any significant fires to date, but that's only a matter of time till that changes. So CAL FIRE's mission has still remained the same, that we are here to put out 95% of our fires to 10 acres or less before they become larger fires. But the new or the newly reinvigorated approach is that fire has to be on the landscape, and it's going to be there one way or another. And we can either do it on our terms and provide for a healthier ecosystem and create better situations for firefighters in future fire events, or we can do nothing and have a much more devastating fire and potentially a long-term impact that we may not recover from, depending on climatic conditions.
Yeah, and so I have, thanks, Chief. So I have both you guys here, and I think sometimes how you guys apply your respective regulations overlap, and sometimes they don't. So Chief Nicholls, can you tell us about the geography where CAL FIRE applies the regulations? And if you can, you know, talk a little bit about where you don't, and where you leave that to local jurisdiction or county to handle?
Sure. So in the state of California, it's broken up into 3 different levels. It's the federal, state, and local responsibility area. So CAL FIRE is responsible for the state responsibility area, which is basically the watershed areas of the state that provide that water and the resources for the state as a whole. So basically, when you look at Sonoma County, the valley floor around Sonoma, Santa Rosa, Petaluma, Geyserville, Cloverdale, out to Forestville is basically all local responsibility area. And then basically west of Forestville and anywhere off of the valley floor in the North County and or over in the Sonoma Valley and west of Petaluma are the state responsibility area. And that encompasses approximately 700,000 acres of land here in the county. So it's a significant portion of the county.
So if a property owner has an issue or a concern or a question, is there a place they can go or a map that they can look at to see if they're in the state responsibility area or the SRA or a local responsibility or LRA or something that would help them to figure out who to call first with an issue if they need help with it? Oh, you're muted, Chief Nicholls. Chief Nicholls, you're muted.
There we go. How about now?
Yeah, that's better.
I was trying to cheat and do 2 things at once and see if the SRA viewer was still there. That was a big thing that came out several years ago. So it allowed the general public to see whether or not they were in the SRA. I believe it's still active, but I didn't want to lead people astray. So FRAP definitely has it. If you go to the CAL FIRE website, fire.ca.gov, there's a link to the FRAP folks that produce the maps for the state, and there is an SRA viewer there. I am looking now, and there is, if you do SRA viewer online, it'll pull up a link to the CAL FIRE to a CAL FIRE SRA viewer. So there's that route. But if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to contact your local CAL FIRE station, and they should be able to answer that question for you.
Thanks very much. Gosh, I had another question for you. Now I lost it. I'll come back to it. Okay, so then you're, actually, I remember now. So with this fire season, well underway, do you have a cadre of folks out there doing like these fire regulation inspections now? And, what does that force look like and how well are they trained?
We do have folks out there. We have 6 dedicated inspectors for the CAL FIRE unit, for the Sonoma Lake Napa unit here. Unfortunately, that really is a drop in the bucket. So across the unit total, we have roughly 2 million acres worth of land that we're covering, and from the Colusa County line, Interstate 5 to Petaluma, and Fairfield up to the Sea Ranch. So it's a significant chunk of property. So in order to bolster our defensible space inspectors, which really are a relatively new component to CAL FIRE. So it used to be that we conducted all of our inspections with just engine companies, so our personnel assigned to fire stations. But we wanted to increase the scale and pace that we were doing that. And so each unit, depending on its size, there's 21 administrative units here in the state, gets a set amount of inspectors. So for us, we're one of the largest units in the state, and so we get 6 inspectors. So currently, the leading element of those, we're still hiring the last couple of those folks, but they've been working out in Monterey, up Franz Valley, Mountain Home Ranch Road area, to work areas that we historically struggle to get to. So in a perfect world, depending on the amount of inspectors we have, we're looking to inspect a third of the homes in the county in the state responsibility area as a attainable goal. But just with the staffing that we have at this point, there's no way that we can get to every house every year. So we try to break it up so that we visit every house once every 3 years. So those defensible space inspectors are specifically for clusters or communities where they can make a dent in the overall threat out there. And then our engine companies that are more landlocked closer to the fire stations, because they all have their own individual initial attack areas, those are hitting areas or communities that they can get to in a timely fashion and yet still be ready available for wildland fire response. So our engine companies are expected to complete 10 inspections per week. And so here in the county, I have 14 frontline fire engines. So that's 140 inspections on the engine side. And then the defensible space inspectors, because they don't have to go chase calls for service, their benchmark is 40 inspections per day for a team of 2.
So when they go out there, what's the progression of enforcement? Because that's what seems like a lot of work. I'm curious who does the follow-up on any violations and what the progression looks like. So like for hypothetically, I could see, a fire inspector going out, doing an initial site visit, writing a notice of violation. Hey, you have this much time to get it corrected. Then what happens? Does that inspector do that first level of follow-up? And I'm curious how many times that goes back and forth before it goes up to a level of either, citing fines or actually taking it to a criminal complaint even.
Sure. So on the state side, there's no notice prior to inspections. In a perfect world, we notice the community so people aren't surprised by the inspectors being out there. But the Public Resources Code doesn't require us to notice folks before they go out. So we found historically here in the unit that it's an education component. People always expect a fire to occur somewhere else, or they expect it to be somebody else's property. And so when we show up and have that conversation with them about, no, fire, it's not a matter of if, it's when. Every square inch of this county has burned at some point in time and will burn again at a future point in the future. And it may be tomorrow, it may be 300 years from now, but it will burn. And so those inspections occur when we go in on the first inspection. In a perfect world, there's a conversation between the landowner and the inspectors. This year with COVID-19, it's kind of thrown us a curveball, and so our first inspection is basically a non-contact inspection. And if the individual would like a more in-depth conversation or have us come back at some point in time, and they're more than welcome to do that. But if the inspectors can see violations from the road and avoid making contact with the landowner, doing our part to not spread COVID-19 any more than we can or we have to, then we leave a notice of the inspection. And so if it's a compliant inspection, then we're good. If it's not compliant, then we give that person normally 30 days to address the violations that we've seen during that first inspection. My preference is the inspector that did the first inspection does the second inspection, because sometimes one inspector will see something that another inspector doesn't see, and that creates frustration and confusion for the general public. And so my expectation is the folks that did the first inspection, barring some catastrophic emergency, are going to redo the second inspection if they were found non-compliant on the first inspection. So at the end is 30 days, so it's 2 months basically by the time we get to the third inspection. But during the third inspection, we then, if they are found to still not be in compliance, then that can create enforcement actions for us. And so that's a citation that on the first infraction of that penal or public resources code, that can be $100 fine that they have to pay to the county for not being compliant with their defensible space. If they're found multiple times to be violating the same public resources code, by the time they get to 3 subsequent inspections where they are non-compliant, not in one season, but in multiple seasons, they can actually, the fine can go up to $500. So it's not the crime of the century, but obviously we don't want to do that if we don't have to. And so historically, we have had better than 90% compliance rates with folks when we're out doing those inspections and taking that time to educate them on what they can do to protect themselves and their home and their neighbors, ultimately, depending on the size or the proximity of homes in a subdivision or a community. And we've had great results. So not a tool that we've used a lot in the past, but depending on how compliance goes here in the future, that's an easy citation that we can turn into the district attorney's office and prosecute through that process.
Yeah, you said a very important word there that I want to expound on, and that's called education. You know, when I was doing those inspections, when I was an inspector and the fire marshal, you know, my first goal was to educate and try as hard as I could to get voluntary compliance. Now, with that said, I have a question that somebody brought up I want to ask. If a property owner wants somebody, an expert from CAL FIRE, to come out and look at their property to give them advice on what to do, can they do that without risking the incurrence of a violation? With FireSafe Sonoma, we're right in the middle of creating a program to do exactly that, to provide home assessments, we're calling them, to go out and educate people and give them advice on how to reduce their risk. But is that something that CAL FIRE can offer without fear of repercussions down the road?
Yeah, so historically, the person who contacts us and says, could you please come and look at my property and tell me what I can do, wants to do what they can do to make sure that their property is safe. And so we haven't had any issues. We're not there to get anybody. So when we get those sort of phone calls, we're happy to go out and give them our input on what we think that they should be doing. We don't, as a rule, go and inspect complaints against one landowner because we don't feel that that's fair or appropriate. So we will go and inspect a street or a neighborhood, but we won't. We try our best to not get involved in neighbor disputes. And I see that Stuart Mitchell had asked about how we can talk to our neighbors about that defensible space. That's one of those critical things, is that more times than not, when we get those complaints, the first question that gets asked is, well, have you talked to your neighbor? Well, no, I want you guys to come talk to my neighbor. Well, that's not being a very good neighbor to start things off, and especially depending on the community that you're in. If it's, say, Rionito or Larkfield, where you don't have the spacing between homes that maybe you do in Geyserville, what affects your neighbor is going to affect you. And so it's imperative that neighbors work together with neighbors and try to establish that sense of community and benefit to one another, rather than having a badge show up and tell somebody what they have to do.
Right. You know, that I was going to save this question for later, but and I'll have both of you guys chime in, Chief Williams and Chief Nicholls, if you want to weigh in on this. But so here's kind of like a hypothetical conundrum that I have actually dealt with when I was doing that work. I'm a property owner. I've got my 30 feet. I've got a neighbor whose home is less than 30 feet, or even my 100 feet. I have a neighbor whose home is less than 30 feet from my property line. And it's farther than my 100 feet, okay? So where this issue is farther than 100 feet from my house. Are they obligated to do 100 feet around their structure let's see, how am I going to phrase this? Okay, so let's say if my neighbor's got a building there and they're closer than 100 feet to the property line, am I obligated to do the defensible space around their home that's on my property line, on my property? Does that make sense?
Yes. Oh, go ahead, Chief.
No, I was just going to say, the property line issues are tough, but when you look at Ordinance 6148 or Chapter 13A of the County Code, it's a situation for us where we're looking for 10 feet of clearance from the neighbor's property. Other counties that surround us, such as Napa or Marin County, have larger spacing that they like to see. For us in Sonoma County, it's 10 feet when you have a property line issue with a structure that's in the way. And again, in our county, as you know, there are people with larger parcels that have the 100 feet around their residence or to the property line when you have neighborhoods or things that are closer together. So in that case, we're looking for 30 feet around the home on smaller parcels or to the property line. And if it's a much larger parcel, what we're looking at is out there, that distance away from the one property owner that you spoke about. We're looking for 10 foot of clearance in that case when it comes to the property line.
Okay. So then, yeah, but would I be responsible for maintaining my neighbor's defensible space? I guess what I'm saying, even though it's outside my 100 foot.
So if it's not your property, you're not responsible. Each property owner is responsible for maintaining their property based on the regulations for Sonoma County regulations.
Yeah, but it's my property. It just so happens that their building, their defensible space footprint would actually go onto my property. Well, they're not obligated to do maintenance on my property, but am I responsible for their defensible space, the portion that's on my property? I see Chief Nicholls waving his head no.
Yeah, so like Chief Williams was talking about, under the Public Resources Code, they only go to their property line. And 13A only takes you 10 feet in on your property line. So yes, so on the state side, it's to the property line. So you are not obligated to cut in any vegetation on your side of the property line. The difference, it would be that 13A has more teeth than 4291, and there may be a scenario where, like Chief Williams was talking about, 10 feet in from your property line, you would be obligated to maintain. But Chief, it's your, I'm sure you've got a better description on that.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So at least to some degree, there's a shared responsibility there, which is helpful, I think, in some of the smaller parcels out in, the Guerneville area and Fitch Mountain and Camp Meeker, et cetera. Cool. Well, Chief Williams, let's bring you into the conversation. The codes that the county enforces, as I recall and understand it, are, typically Sonoma County Code Chapter 13, which adopts the California Fire Code by ordinance with local, modifications and amendments. Thank you. And then you've also recently legislated hazardous vegetation compliance ordinance. Can you talk to us a little bit about the codes that the county enforces and maybe give us some insight there?
Great, thank you. Appreciate the invitation. So Sonoma County Code Chapter 13 is essentially the county's fire code, as you indicated, laws and regulations based on the state model code with local amendments, and that is approved by the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors on a 3-year interval. And that is established working closely with the Sonoma County Fire Prevention Officers section of the Sonoma County Fire Chiefs, and establishing standards that are compatible in an attempt to gain consistency between agencies within the county. And so with that, there's also Chapter 13A, or Ordinance 6148, which is the Defensible Space and Abatement of Hazardous Vegetation and Combustible Materials Ordinance. And much of what's contained in that ordinance, since we're at this time of year, is very similar to the standards and regulations that CAL FIRE enforces and does inspections for. I think Chief Nicholls did a great job kind of outlining the whole world of defensible space and vegetation management. Some of the nuances between 4291 and Chapter 13A specifically are that Chapter 13A can also be used to inspect unimproved properties, where 4291 only addresses improved properties, so where there's a structure or a home typically. And so when we are inspecting in the state responsibility area, it typically happens currently as a result of a complaint. And when that happens, we do check in with CAL FIRE to make sure it's not an area that they've already worked in or that they've already inspected. Unfortunately, you do find that you have neighbor-to-neighbor issues quite frequently. In fact, I've probably dealt with 3 or 4 of those today. And typically when that happens, we share with the neighbors that not only are we going to look at the neighbor's property that you're concerned about, but we're going to look at several of the properties in the general vicinity of your community. And it's interesting, sometimes they say, well, never mind. And so there are different, if you will, for lack of a better term, there are different reasons or different perspectives that people have. And sometimes they're pointing a finger at their neighbor, but they forget sometimes that there's 3 fingers pointing back at them as well. And so we're looking to be equitable in how we apply the standards that we have on the books. The other thing for us in Sonoma County, working with CAL FIRE, we're trying to create synergy of CAL FIRE conducting the inspections in the state responsibility area. With us conducting, our focus is in the local responsibility area on parcels that are zoned for 5 acres or less currently. Now, zoning for 5 acres or less does not mean physical size 5 acres or less. It means essentially an area that is zoned where properties can be subdivided into parcels no smaller than typically 5 acres. And so that can be confusing for the public. However, that is changing. On June 22nd, we had the second reading of new amendments to Chapter 13A, which are removing the 5-acre zoning limitation. And what that means essentially is that every parcel in Sonoma County now falls under the requirements of Chapter 13A. Now, resourcing wise, we don't have the ability to look at close to 70,000 parcels. And again, as Chief Nicholls indicated, CAL FIRE looks at quite a few of those on a 3-year rotation. I believe they hope to get all of the inspections done in that 3-year period. So for this year, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, I think CAL FIRE is looking to do about 2,500 to 3,000 inspections, and we're hoping to do in the neighborhood of 3,000 to 4,000 inspections. So the synergy created is a total of 7,000 inspections performed in Sonoma County. That's more than we have done in years past. And certainly there is a lot more to do. And so one of the things that is happening with Sonoma County is we recently received grants through the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program to update the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. And that's what we hope to use in the future based on fuel modeling and fire behavior modeling to establish priority areas in the county so that we can spend the limited resources that we have. Just about a year and a half ago, the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors authorized the Expanded Fuels and Landscape Resiliency Campaign, which was $900,000 from Transient Occupancy Tax, or TOT, funds that come into the county for the purposes of conducting vegetation management inspections, conducting abatements for non-compliant properties, public education and outreach, working with organizations like Fire Safe Sonoma, who was just recently granted $75,000 for the purposes of the work that Fire Safe Sonoma does in educating the public and helping to develop local CWPPs and develop much that the community uses for the benefit of fire safety, life safety, property conservation, and protecting the environment, as Chief Nicholls indicated earlier. And so additionally, there's funding to address large parcel projects, as well as the environmental compliance piece of that. And then a small amount of that budget goes for administrative work for the staff to support those programs. And so the board has invested some level of funding to create greater vegetation management, and defensible space inspections throughout the county. So when you tie back to the ordinance that we had amended on the 22nd of June, there are a couple key things. One is that the 5-acre parcel zoning limitation has been removed. There's a section now called private right of action that gives neighbors the ability to take injunctive relief or to seek injunctive relief when you have properties that are non-compliant and essentially say, I'm not going to do what I need to do to create a higher degree of fire safety. Additionally, it modifies the name. We were formerly the Sonoma County Fire and Emergency Services Department. We're now the Permit Sonoma Fire Prevention Division. It also aligns with Chapter 1 of the Sonoma County Code, which is the section that talks about or addresses enforcement and due process and the potential fines that exist. Prior to the amendments being made, a resident could receive up to $1,000 a day fine. Obviously, we're going through an economic downturn right now. We're dealing with the COVID situation. The board was cognizant of that, and so we aligned to Chapter 1, which has much smaller fines. I think the initial fine is at about $25 a day, and can go up, higher. And then if we happen to be working in the state responsibility area, our board and policymakers have determined that the fee structure or the fine structure would align with the same thing that the state responsibility area penalty level or fine level is as well. And so it is our hope that through these programs, again, we'll create a higher degree of fire safety. I think the other couple things that are important to note in the amendments to Chapter 13A are also the exemption for cannabis in terms of the attempt to legalize that industry and working through the use permit process through our planning department, as well as an ag exemption, which means that we're on ag properties. We're going to inspect the defensible space around the structure, but we will not be inspecting crops, which typically are not real fire prone, especially when you're looking at vineyards. And we will focus on around the structure, and again, not the ag operation piece of an ag property, or we will not be focusing on the roads on ag properties. And so those are a couple of the changes that have gone into effect. Currently, we are partnering with 8 fire districts to cover 11 areas of the county with defensible space inspections. Roughly 2,400 inspections will be done. We would anticipate that after the first inspections, which for the county staff covering the areas of Shell Vista, Fitch Mountain, Sodiomi, and Grayton, we expect those first round of inspections to be completed by Friday for us. And then the fire districts are continuing to go out. Sonoma County's done roughly 800 defensible space inspections, meaning the Sonoma County Fire Prevention Division, and then the fire districts that we're partnering with, such as Gold Ridge, Shell Vista, we're contract agency. Grayton, we also do contracts for them. And then you have Sonoma County Fire District doing inspections, along with Sonoma Valley Fire and Rescue or Fire Protection District as of July 1, with some recent annexations. And working together, we are going to cover roughly 2,400 first round inspections and anticipate probably about a 50% non-compliance rate on the first round of inspections. And of course, we'll go back and do re-inspections. If we are found that property is non-compliant, part of that landscape and resiliency budget is roughly $80,000 that is budgeted to address abatements. And what that essentially is a seed money that the county would need to send a contractor out to non-compliant properties, abate the properties, give the property owner an opportunity to pay the bill. If they did not pay the bill, a lien would be placed on the property to secure taxpayer dollars used to abate properties to create a greater degree of fire safety. And so that all works through a due process requirement. Essentially, we do the first inspection. We give you 30 calendar days to bring that into compliance. If you don't bring it into compliance after 30 days, you get roughly 15 days. There is the opportunity for appeal at a hearing to be established. If we don't hear from a resident or an appeal is not filed within 15 days after the second inspection, we can send an abatement contractor out. The property is posted. legal noticing is done. Again, a lien is placed on the property until such time that the county is able to recover taxpayer dollars used to, again, to abate the properties. And so that process was used sparingly. Last year, I think we only abated 5 properties, as Chief Nicholls indicated, as well as Roberta mentioned. Is our goal is to educate the public to gain compliance. It is not to have a stick, but the reality is that it's about carrots and sticks sometimes to get people to move. Unfortunately, the stick is something that we don't like to use. It's used sparingly. And I can speak, close to 35 years of fire service experience. I was in the city of Oakland in 1991 for the Oakland Berkeley Hills firestorm, where 3,500 properties were lost and 25 lives were lost. And I will share with you, in the time frame, that program with Defensible Space started back in 1994. And in 1994, until I left that organization about 7 years ago, there were roughly 350 abatements done over. That's a long period of time. So again, our goal is not to work towards abatement. Our goal is to educate and to gain compliance through education, and to work with property owners to create defensible space to hopefully save their properties and their neighbor properties. And just one thing I like to say, a lot of times we get questions about, I have this 1 or 2 neighbors not doing what they need to do. And that concerns me. And we get a call about it. We go out and we investigate that, inspect that, and we work to gain compliance. It requires the entire neighborhood to work together to create that safety envelope in terms of vegetation management. And that's why it's important that all the residents in a given neighborhood or area participate. And oftentimes I hear, I'm not able to afford it. Or perhaps I'm disabled, or perhaps the person is elderly. And with that, when we really think about a sense of community, there are COPE organizations out there, there are CERT organizations out there, there are fire safe councils out there. And this is a great opportunity for those community groups to work together and to develop community days, if you will, to help neighbors helping neighbors, a sense of community. And that's one of the ways to address that. And I'm going to step aside and let Roberta continue her moderation of the webinar, but there are some grant programs that the county is going to be moving forward. She may get to that later, and I'll talk briefly about it, but there may be some opportunities for residents in certain areas to get some of the work done that's necessary to, one, address vegetation management around their homes, and secondly, to address structural hardening. And then there's programs like the Skype program, which is an energy efficiency program in the county that will provide funding for residents if they need to do some work and finance work such as structural hardening at very low interest rates. And so I'll step back right now and turn it back over to you, Roberta.
Thanks, Chief. Yeah, I have a couple questions that I'm gonna, that are similar, I think, a little bit in the queue. So I'm gonna kind of synthesize those into a couple of more broad reaching questions. So for each of you, with regard to frontage roads, or even in general, working with the bureaucracy. For example, if I've got a piece of frontage road that is actually on a county parcel, whether it's a legitimate county parcel that is an easement, quote unquote, or whether it's a county parcel proper, and it's not being maintained, how do I navigate trying to get the government entities to do the vegetation compliance on those properties, whether it be Fish and Game or the county or whoever? What's the recourse there if you're trying to get a government entity to try to do something? Anybody want to take on that one?
I can speak to the fish and game, the fish and wildlife question. I believe that's probably out there off of Harrison Grade and Occidental. As we talked about earlier with the defensible space for the Public Resources Code in the state responsibility area, a neighbor is not obligated to cut vegetation on their property that's not within that 100 feet from a structure. I know there was a setback in talking to some of the folks in Occidental. There was a setback for structures that were built out there. And there's a there's a unique deal with that environment versus, say, some of the other open space in the county that I believe that's a rare and possibly endangered species of manzanita. So obviously Fish and Wildlife isn't looking to burn it up. So that's one of those things, working with that agency to figure out if there's something that can be done to address that parcel, but they're not obligated to do that. The roadways, I think, is definitely in Chief Williams' court, other than we will recommend to folks when we're out doing inspections on homes that we would like to see 10 feet off of the side of the driveway and 15 feet above the driveway, with the idea that fire engines are only getting bigger as time goes on. And so that space is critical to getting the fire apparatus in a rapid period of time, and also getting the homeowners or public out.
Yeah. You know, in terms of fire apparatus too, I think most of us, when we think of a fire engine, we think, oh, okay, something as big as a UPS truck or a garbage truck. But, you know, when you really think about it, especially in some of these long dead end roads, you're talking about trying to get a dozer down that road on a low boy. You know, that's a big rig, that's a wide load. And, you know, I can't even imagine trying to get that apparatus down some of our roads just with one lane. So yeah, so folks need to be cognizant of that. So the vegetation along road edges is a big deal for me personally. And with Fire Safe Sonoma, we've really been trying to highlight that issue, because with regard to vegetation along roadways, oftentimes that's your evacuation route. And with life safety being the #1 priority, as you alluded to earlier, Chief Nicholls, you know, getting people out of the area to save life, that's key. So if there's anything we can do to encourage folks to do that fuels reduction along roadways, it would be, you know, huge. Chief Williams, do you guys have any way at the county to encourage road maintenance agreements that would include a condition of maintaining the vegetation along a roadway? I know there's a lot of communities that have CC&Rs with road maintenance agreements built in that were pulled in at the time the planned community was established. But are there any levers or even tools of encouragement you can use to get some of these planned communities that share the responsibility for a road to formalize that agreement and cause them to create a legitimate road maintenance agreement for vegetation? Is there any lever we can use there?
So there's a couple things there are early discussions going on about that, and part of it, every day I hear something about, you know, county responsibility, private county right of way, and overgrown vegetation. And so I can share that, you know, speaking with transportation and public works staff, they do roughly 300 to 400 miles a year, and I think there's roughly 1,300 square miles of county right of way. And so when you look at 300 to 400 miles a year of mowing and doing vegetation management, out of 1,300 square miles, that is not a whole lot. So they're continuing to look at ways to gain and identify funding for that purpose. The one thing that they are doing right now is their vegetation management program is really about a safety, road safety, and sight lines and obstructions in the roadway. And so they look to clear, as they do this mowing, 2 to 4 feet off the edge of pavement and up to 15 feet high, which essentially ties into what Chief Nicholls mentioned a while ago about the fire engines that are getting larger and larger, and the ability to pass and the ability to keep evacuation routes, if you will, or roads open. It's really hard to designate evacuation routes just for the public when you look at how dynamic fire is in terms of its movement based on fuel, weather, typography, which all are key issues when addressing a wildland fire. And again, when you look at what we're doing with our vegetation management work, it's really looking at those average kind of everyday fires, not a firestorm scenario. And so while you may receive a defensible space inspection, that doesn't guarantee that your home or property is going to survive a fire. And that's just, you know, being very candid and providing the reality. So we're constantly looking at ways to address roadside issues, and we'll be working more with Fire Safe Sonoma, who's doing some outreach for us in helping to look at that process of how we might be able to get private property owners or certain property owners or government agencies to do more. When there's things going on the side of the freeway, I get a complaint about it. That's a call from me to Caltrans, even though that's not specifically unincorporated parts of the county necessarily, but it's a call to Caltrans. When you look at other issues on county roads, we have partnered with organizations such as Recology, who has helped to pick up material that our chipper crew or residents have been able to cut along the roadsides. And so the idea is creating public-private partnerships with a goal in mind of reducing fuel levels to increase safety. And so that's, some of what's out there. But again, frankly, once again, there's more work to do than funding available. And that's always a challenge, and we have to try to look at priorities. One of the things that emergency management has been doing in Sonoma County is working on alert and warning and working on, along with the sheriff's office, on, evacuation zones and things like that. And so this work is in progress. It's continuing to move forward, but there are no solutions. And the more input that we get and the more that we're able to discuss it and create partnerships, I think we'll find greater benefit at the end of the day. And then, of course, when we look to do address fire safe standards and new constructions in state responsibility areas, we're always looking at in those high and very high fire severity zones, the development of a vegetation management plan by the individual that is developing that land. Then, of course, having the follow-up being the vegetation management inspections to ensure that they maintain what was established when that particular development occurred.
Yeah. So let me have one of these questions here. Oh yeah, that's it. So how do you guys each respectively enforce the 0 to 5 foot? With Fire Safe Sonoma, the other thing, the two big things we're focusing on, or I'm focusing on, is roadside frontage for evacuation, and then the 0 to 5 foot non-combustible zone, as we've coined it. Particularly in the smaller lots where really that's almost all they have, like Rio Nito and up on Camp Meeker and places like that. I heard there might be some legislation in the works to create language specific to that area. Can you guys speak to that, or what you each individually do to help enforce the regulations in that area of the defensible space?
Well, for Sonoma County, there is no specific regulation for non-combustible zone at 0 to 5. I think there are discussions, and perhaps Chief Nicholls may know, but I believe there's discussions going on at the State Board of Forestry around new regulations to potentially be implemented possibly in 2021. But very much, those are very much so still, I think, discussions. When you look at the impact of that and implementation, that is quite a task. But obviously studies have proven that having a non-combustible zone is quite beneficial to property owners and their homes. But at this point, we are not addressing any specific regulations for a non-combustible zone. We are using Chapter 7A of the Building Code to still address construction in the very high fire severity zone areas.
Yeah, to jump into that, so that was something that has been discussed since basically the Valley Fire forward, and especially the 2017 fires and subsequently the Camp Fire in 2018, that the insurance industry is proposing or advocating that there should be nothing combustible in the 0 to 5 feet. So I talked about originally 0 to 30 and 30 to 100. The insurance industry has taken it a step farther and said 0 to 5, there should be nothing there. Historically, what has happened is folks have ornamental material, be it the gorilla hair landscape covering, the shredded redwood bark, or wood chips, or ornamental plants that have a larger dead component in them. They look green from a distance. Juniper is a classic example that it looks great from afar, but it's far from good. And so the discussion has been get rid of anything combustible within that 5-foot zone from the house. The super black and white folks are looking for anything, so roses. Me personally, there's not a large dead component in a rose, and it's not going to burn as intensely as, say, a manzanita or a rosemary or a juniper, but that's being discussed. And so that obviously is a far-reaching impact across the state. And so I believe it's being talked about on the Sacramento level. I don't know where they're at in that process. So at this point for us, when we're out doing those inspections, is a recommendation that looking at your house, the rosemary that you have planted underneath your window here and in front of the vent for the underside of your house, when that rosemary catches fire, it's going to lead to your window failing, which is going to bring fire into the house and or get into the crawl space underneath the house. And like I mentioned with the decks earlier, burn that house down from the inside out. So at this point, it's a recommendation for us. But you may find with insurance companies that are doing defensible space inspections, they may require that to keep their policy current. But at this point, we're not there on the state level.
Yeah, I hope the legislators are careful with that moving forward. The reason I say that, I'm working, Fire Safe Sonoma, we're working with the Sonoma Ecology Center and Master Gardener and others to provide landscaping education for fire-wise landscapes. And I personally am learning a lot about that and understanding that, it's probably more okay than I used to think to have some vegetation, close to the house, but you still have to be careful with it. And then the other part of that I want to share with folks and remind folks that if you've got movable things, if you have plants in pots, put them on wheels, and have it set up so you can roll them farther away. If you have lawn chairs, anything combustible there that can easily be moved, when you get that red flag warning or when you get that advisory notice evacuation, not demand for evacuation, ahead of that hopefully, but when you get that intel, if you will, get that stuff out of there right away. Make sure that 5-foot, space is clear, right away before you do evacuate.
Roberta, I think you muted yourself.
I did. I took my hand off of the microphone key. Sorry. Chief Williams, I'm going to ask you a question that Chief Nicholls responded to earlier, and that is, if a county inspector goes out to do a fire inspection, can that be requested in such a way that the inspector's not going to look for, code violations while they're out there? And also, if an inspector's out there looking for fire code violations, if they see something that may be a building code violation, are they obligated to respond to that and pass that over to the building official?
So for us, our focus really is on the fire safety portion. And so our inspectors are looking at that. I would think that, as fire professionals, if they see something that is extremely egregious, they're going to report that. If it's something that's relatively minor, most are there to focus on doing defensible space inspection. And that's what the purpose is. We want to educate the public. We don't want to alienate the public. We want to work with them to do what they can so that we can protect their life safety, their property, and the environment in their area. And so with that, our focus again is on our mission, which is to look at Chapter 13A when doing vegetation management or defensible space inspections and focus on that. And then if it's, a permit inspection or some type of business inspection, that's the focus. again, if they see something egregious, that would probably be referred over, but that is not the first and foremost item that they look for. You're muted again.
Nope, still muted.
Okay, I just learned something about Zoom. My mouse key has to be on the screen to operate the spacebar mute. Okay, got it. We're at like 10 after, a little more than 10 after, so I'm gonna start hitting some of these Q&As. Let's see. Oh, a question came in regarding, I think you guys can see Katie Long's question regarding fuel reduction that falls under PG&E responsibility areas. I'm assuming that's on their easement. What agency would be responsible for confirming that PG&E's work is taken care of, I think is what she's asking.
So to guess, and Katie, maybe type in if if we didn't hit it, but historically there's been a concern from the general public that PG&E takes too much when they cut the trees back because it looks ugly or it's not what people want to see. In this day and age, that's going to be the rule of thumb, that we would rather prevent a fire from occurring than to maintain the shape of a tree. So it's a very important thing that when you're planting around a house or you're planting your vegetation that you want to see on your yard, that you pick species that aren't going to grow up and impact those power lines, because that way you don't have to worry about them getting cut. If you were going the other way, in that if there's areas where there's violations, okay, yeah, half-mile lines, trees unmarked for 5 years, never drop. I couldn't speak to that, but if you can give me a location on that, then we can reach out to PG&E and see where they're at in that process.
And I concur with that as well. If you see something you believe is a problem, let us know, and we can follow up with PG&E. I will share that one of the things that we're doing with our defensible space inspections that we're doing is on our collector app, which is the data collection platform we use. We put a tab in there to capture when an inspector identifies trees growing in the transmission lines. And that's simply so that we can run a report and provide it to the PG&E vegetation management rep that we deal with, hoping that they will have the resources and the ability to cut those back to the extent possible based on their current policies. And as Chief Nicholls indicated, things probably won't look as beautiful as they looked in the past. There's probably going to be more taken away from the power lines to try to prevent major fires happening. But again, we certainly can follow up on that as well.
And one other thing to tie in with that, Katie, I see that you're going to reach out, but PG&E has different marks for different work that they're going to be doing. So a lot of times a dot indicates the color, and a dot indicates that they've inspected the tree for their program for quality assurance. But then if I remember right, a tree that's coming out is going to have a solid line across the trunk, possibly an X, but if it has a T on it, it's T for trim, and so they're not going to take that tree out. They're just going to take the limbs that are threatening the power lines.
I'm just going to touch on this before I forget later. I do want to mention, I'm sure Chief Williams and Chief Nicholls, you've saw a few, not a lot, but more than a couple, I think, inquiries with regard to, getting somebody out and then having the complaint grow or be tossed to building officials or whatever. So that might be a takeaway for you guys in your independent organizations, to be aware that it feels like there's folks out there that I think there might be a bit of a trust issue there, where folks fear that if you guys come out, it might make things worse. I personally don't think that's the case. My personal experience in doing those inspections and being on the receiving end of them as well for my home has been very, very good. I've never had an issue there. But anyway, that might be a takeaway.
Well, and to tie into what Chief Williams was saying earlier, you know, we're there to take care of the community and build that public trust. So my firefighters on the engines are not building code officials, nor are my defensible space inspectors. So they may not recognize a building code violation. So they truly are there specifically for that defensible space inspection. And we want to keep that goodwill of folks allowing us to do that.
Let's see, what else we got? Thanks, Chief. Hydrated. Yeah, Joe Lieber bench. Oh, you know what? I want to, Paul Woodward feels like he's got some information to share. Paul, I'm going to turn on your audio so you can kind of elaborate on the couple comments you meant or that you mentioned. And maybe you can share your information with the group because most of what you mentioned I'm not totally familiar with. So I want to learn about it as well. So yeah, Paul, why don't you let us know what you're thinking?
Yeah, well, first of all, I agree that the CAL FIRE is definitely not out to put people in jail and so forth, but I'm a volunteer evaluator with Mount Veeder Fire Safe, and the most common objection we have is that someone heard of somebody, so it's kind of a rumor thing. I think you're on the right track, you know, keep doing the right thing, and the word will spread that you're good guys, and the people that are complaining about so-and-so who may have done something in the past basically will get tired of saying that because now they have new positive information. But Jeff Enos is involved in the program far more than I am, and he would know more about the specific objections. That's all I can say. I think you guys are great professionals. This is really a wonderful seminar. But we have about 540 people in the Mount Veeder Fire Safe, and we've put bulletins out on all the roads going into the area. We've done our pancake breakfasts, and we have a very few people who want an evaluation. So I went out door to door for my neighbors, and I asked them, you know, why, you know, let's have an evaluation. And that was the most common objection. And these are reasonable people. One guy, for example, said, well, so-and-so had CAL FIRE come out, and then the next thing you know, he had $60,000 work that he had to do. So I don't know if that's true or not. Again, it's a rumor. You should just be aware of it, and I think you're on the right track. Keep doing the right thing. That's all.
Perfect, great. Thanks for sharing that, Paul. We appreciate it. Okay, so let me go down this list of questions. Are there any programs available for groups of neighbors to help clear brush from roads, chipper programs, etc.? Yes, there are in different areas, and the degree of resources out there vary. I'm going to let Chief Williams talk a little bit about the county chipper program first. Well, actually, let me tell you that Geyserville's got some crews that they do chipping work out in North County, and Fire Safe Sonoma from time to time we get grant funding to do exactly what you're talking about. A big, I think an important way to navigate from where you are to where you describe, Tracy, is to form a community coalition and craft, whether it's a Fire Safe Council, Firewise Community, COPE, whatever, and craft a community wildfire protection plan for that local community. And that plan will, at the end of the day, without going into a lot of detail there, is meant to identify risks in that community and point to projects that you've come up with to mitigate those risks. And by writing all that down and memorializing it, it creates a increased likelihood that you'll get grant funding to do those projects. But Chief Williams, you want to talk about the chipper program? And then Chief Nicholls, if you know of anything that CAL FIRE is doing that might help, that would be great too.
Great, thank you. So the county has a free roadside chipper program, but I will share with you, since 2014, there's been a 274% increase in the use of that chipper without a corresponding increase in the budget. And so with that, we were able to take some unused funds last fiscal year and move it over for this year. So there's about a $245,000 budget for chipping. We are already up to about 560 jobs. I'm going to have to actually close the intake of the program when we get to about 600 jobs. It's going to take us several months to complete that work. And we do partner with the North Sonoma County Fire Protection District, formerly Geyserville Fire Protection District, is doing some chipping work for us up in the northern part of the county. We also partner with the North Bay Conservation Corps, and then we have, starting this coming week, 2 crews that will be in operation every day. And we have roughly, at this point, about 60% of the applications still open. And so we have to shut down the intake because it's going to take, again, that period of time, the next couple months, to clear out the open jobs. If we're able to get down to a lower level, then we will reopen. This program and the ability to submit applications opened on April 22nd, with the chipping work actually starting on May 4th. And so we will continue moving forward as the budget permits for that. And then the other piece that ties to this is in certain areas of the county, the northwest portion of the county, the Occidental area, there is a CAL FIRE grant. And it's the Northwest Fuels Reduction. I forget the exact name of it. Perhaps Roberta can remember that. It's quite a bit to say, but that provides will provide some roadside clearance and vegetation removal with chipping. Part of that budget used for that chipping with county staff, and then the other portion of the funding used to do chipper jobs in the project area. And so, coming up here in about 2.5 weeks, we'll be doing a couple chipper days in the Occidental area. We just came off of 2 weeks ago doing a couple days in the Fitch Mountain area, and there was one other, and I forget the exact location, but in the southwestern part of the county, I believe it was, earlier this season. And so we do the best that we can with the limited resources that we have. We're constantly looking at opportunities to partner. We're looking at potentially additional grants to increase the funding level. Grants are always tough when it comes to sustainability of programs, but if we can find grants, we'll look to increase the pace and scale and time frame that we're doing chipper jobs. And so there is a resource for you to access the resource. I always suggest to people just simply go to Google and put in the search Sonoma County Chipper Program. It will take you to our website. Once you get to the website, information is there that will outline for you what the requirements are for the chipper program, and also a link to SoCo Reported, which is a technology platform that the county uses. That's how you sign up for the chipper program. And it's a first come, first served program with zones established throughout the county, 9 zones. And we spend about a week in each zone, and we rotate to the next. You get about 2 hours of staff on site. And so what we're finding is that sometimes people are putting piles out where they have not signed up, and then calling, telling us that they're part of the chipper program. Of course, they're not, because we require they sign up on SoCo Reported. So we ask that residents and people using the service adhere to our program guidelines so that we can hopefully be fair and equitable to all of the residents seeking to use the service.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, one of the things with regard to that, Chief Williams, that I've heard feedback on through Fire Safe Sonoma is that when the county rolled over to the SoCo reporting platform or porthole, it feels like, I'm going to use the term threshold resistance. It feels like, as I understand it, there's more threshold resistance in terms of getting the information into the system and trusting that the work will actually get done or that somebody will be contacted. So do you guys have any plans at the county to maybe make that a little different or more robust, or even maybe provide folks with some information in terms of how that system works? Because I think that's new this year. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's new this year. And people who have used the system in the past find it a little different. And you know, when something's different, we all struggle with that. Can you speak to that, Chief?
It is new, and we certainly expect to get that feedback with a new program. But as people use it, become familiar with it, then that goes away less and less and less. And so it's like any other technology platform or new process. When people aren't used to something, it takes them a while to get used to it. But this actually creates greater efficiency. It provides an email notification back to them when we receive their application, when the work is going to happen, that type of thing. So it's probably better than trying to actually catch a person. And then obviously, as we deal with challenges with declining resources, technology oftentimes, is designed to fill that gap. And that's what one of the outcomes of budget reductions is using the technology. And so we may have opportunities to partner. I know you've talked about the potential for, Fire Safe Sonoma helping with maybe the intake piece. And so something that we're certainly not close to, but at the same time, we have to know that, we have reliability and someone is going to get back to people, that type of thing, right? And so certainly we're always looking at ways to enhance and improve the program, but right now, SoCo reported is the avenue that we are using and will probably continue to use moving forward. Again, I think as people use it more and more, they'll get used to the technology.
Yeah, perfect. And also with regard to that earlier question about doing some community chipping work, there's also the possibility of doing a real quick fundraiser, raise, about $3,500, $4,000. And with that money, a community of, residents, homeowners, whatever, they can rent a chipper machine, take it out to a central site and have the folks in their community bring the stuff to chip. Same thing can be done with dumpsters. You could do a dumpster day or things like that. So, try to imagine what you can do as a collective within your own community, rather than relying on others, whether it's grant funding or the county or whoever. Sometimes, the best way to get something done is just do it yourself, honestly. So that's just something I thought of, I wanted to share. So we're like almost at the 7:30 mark. So Chief Nicholls and Chief Williams, do you guys have anything you want to add to close out before we go?
I'm just going to put that last winter we tried to up our game here in the county to help out Chief Williams, that we were offered up the opportunity to a couple communities that if they did the legwork on the front side to cut and pile vegetation alongside the road in their community, we would come in a planned event and take care of that for them. So we did a cut along, not a cut, but we treated along Palmer Creek out off of Mill Creek, and then Hacienda and up into Diamond A earlier this spring. We're working on the east side of Hacienda with a homeowners group over there as well. I mean, it's not a widespread deal because we're sharing one chipper across the entire unit, and so luckily it's here in Sonoma County for now. But folks that are interested, there's that opportunity, as well as, like you mentioned, Roberta and Chief Williams, that there are the CAL FIRE grants out there, that the work that Northern Sonoma County Fire Protection District is doing right now is part of a CAL FIRE grant that they secured. And then obviously the Northwest Road grant also as a CAL FIRE grant. So communities or fire safe councils have the ability to tap into those grants. That was a 5-year program. I believe we're in year 4 of 5 at this point. So we got this year and one more year to go. Hopefully those continue to be funded, because that was a project that Senator Dodd was very excited about maintaining. So hopefully we can see that continue. We're just going to have to see what the state budget looks like with the current fallout from the pandemic.
Yeah, and you reminded me, Chief Nicholls, I do want to speak directly to the West County Transportation and Public Works project. I kind of been neglecting following up on that, especially when Chief Williams kind of set it up for me. So yeah, out in West County, Fire Safe Sonoma has an agreement, or we're engaged as part of a grant funded project of CAL FIRE funding to do work out in the areas near Guerneville, West County. We just increased the footprint to include Camp Meeker and Occidental areas. So if you live in or around those areas, um, with regard to what Fire Safe Sonoma can do for you, we are doing home assessments. So if you want an educational visit of one of our professionals to come out and do a site assessment and kind of give you advice in terms of what you can do to improve your defensible space, we'll do that for free. We have, I think, an allotment of 100 to do, and we haven't hardly even touched the iceberg on that. So if you live out in that area and want a home assessment and you're afraid that, you know, if you call CAL FIRE or the county, something bad might happen, give us a call at Fire Safe Sonoma. We'll see if you're in the project area. If you are, we'll send somebody out. Actually, regardless of whether in the fire foot in that project area or not, we just received funding through another grant to do some more of those. So if you would like, anybody at this point, if you would like a home assessment done by a professional, but it not be a regulatory inspection per se, you can contact Fire Safe Sonoma and we can get somebody out there to do that for you, with you, I should say. And with regard to COVID, we have instituted some social distancing policies for our home assessor contractors. And so, as Chief Nicholls mentioned earlier, you know, our site visits will be from afar with a very limited contact, personal contact. And, you know, that can be to the level that both the site assessor and the property owner is comfortable. But we have policies in place to deal with that. So we're like at 7:32. Chief Williams, do you have anything you want to close out with before we go?
You know, I just want to share with your group, we certainly appreciate you joining us tonight. And again, this work is valuable work in terms of creating safer environments, meeting your neighbors, working together for a common goal, a common good of creating a safe, defensible space in a more fire-resistant community. So thank you for the opportunity and look forward to, if there are any questions that you have, feel free to reach out to the Sonoma County Fire Prevention Division and we'll be happy to follow up. Thank you.
Yeah, one last thing before we go, you guys. Karen mentioned, do you guys see the question from Karen with regard to recology? I think Chief Nicholls, you alluded to that. Can you answer that question for her?
So I'm operating on a phone, so I can't see. Can you read the
I mean,
question?
Chief Nicholls. Karen says, someone mentioned working with recology to pick up vegetation. If neighbors did the work, can you share a name of someone in the company they might reach out to? I forget who responded to that earlier, but can one of you?
So that was me, but
Okay.
again, those are things that they do for the community on occasion. And so at this point, reach out to me and I'll see what I can do and see what type of programs they may have to be able to help out a community. Perhaps it's a reduced cost or maybe no cost. I can't make any guarantees, so we can certainly reach out. Typically organizations have programs as part of kind of community, being part of the community and doing work for the community where they will actually do some voluntary type work. And so that's happened on a couple occasions.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm going to call that a wrap. Thank you guys both so much for taking the time out of your evening, giving up a chunk of your evening to do this webinar. And the folks that attended, thank you so much for attending. I appreciate you checking this out, and I'm hoping that you find this information of value. And like I said earlier, I'm not going to do a survey follow-up to this webinar. So if you have any specific questions that you want to bounce off of us at Fire Safe Sonoma, please feel free to ping us. And yeah, thank you guys all so very much and have a great evening. Oh, once again, too, this thing will be available probably within about a week. It's been taking me about a week to edit, process, and upload the video onto YouTube to share with everybody. So in about a week, this webinar will be available for other folks to view. So that's it from me and Fire Safe Sonoma. Thank you guys once again so very much for all your help and all the work you do. Thanks. Bye-bye.